that worked on that campaign. We got Peyton Andrews, we got Tyler Hobbs. This is kind of exciting for me because I get to realize that I'm old because Peyton was a student of mine years and years ago. What year was it?
2012.
Oh my gosh, so a long, long time ago. But nonetheless, let me go ahead and just open up the floor. We're going to let them chat for a bit. I'll ask them a few questions and such, and then we'll open up the floor to a little discussion. We will. But in the meantime, as I've asked you before, you guys are always real polite and professional, so let's go ahead and continue that. First of all, Peyton, Tyler, whatever order you guys want to address it, give us, again, repeat your names, but tell us what roles you play inside the organization of Springfield Area Commerce, and just kind of introduce yourselves.
So my name is Peyton Andrews. I went to school here for 2 years and then went to Missouri State. I very much so recommend that path, first of all, because it was a smooth transition and I was able to enjoy obviously the same career opportunities that anyone else was that went to a four-year institution the entire time. So I have to say that as an OTC graduate. Basically what I do is I work on public policy a little bit, but I also plan events. I host big guests like we just had Senator Roy Blunt in like last week, 2 weeks ago.
And again, Roy Blunt, one of the 2 senators of Missouri.
Of Missouri.
Not running for re-election this year.
Right.
But a senator of Missouri.
Senator of Missouri. And that's like a 100-person event that we have host at the chamber. So I do a lot of that work, setting up those events, hosting that guest, and making sure that they have a great time here when they come to Springfield. I also work a lot with City Council. Has anyone heard anything about City Council recently? It's been kind of crazy in Springfield. There's been a lot of pit bull stuff and other controversial issues. So I get to be at the front line of a lot of those things that you hear about in the news every day that affect your everyday life.
Well, I'm Tyler Hobbs. I am the newest member still at the Chamber. I started back in November. I am a policy analyst on our public affairs team. So a lot of the stuff I get to deal with is public policy through the state level, tracking a lot of our priority legislation, researching and writing some policy papers for the Chamber, and then advocating for our businesses and our members up in Jefferson City as well.
Where is Chamber of Commerce?
So we're actually
Where is that located?
We are on the corner of John Q. Hammons Parkway and St. Louis Street, just right across from the federal court.
And that's where you both work?
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, Tyler, you said you're a policy analyst?
Correct.
Okay, and does that change from campaign to campaign, or does that kind of have consistent duties day to day?
I have consistent duties day to day. A lot of my focus is on the state level, focusing on state legislation and just working through the process there.
It would not shock you guys to know that we've talked a bit about Yes for OTC here in this class. We talked about it quite a bit. Obviously, it's relevant. It's kind of one of those weird stars aligned situations where people are taking a political science class at OTC. We're actually talking about campaigns right now, while a campaign regarding OTC is occurring. So, first of all, kind of straighten out these organizations. We have Springfield Chamber of Commerce. We have the PAC. Talk about the PAC for a minute, about Committee for the Future, and Yes for OTC. How do these 3 entities I just mentioned relate to each other?
So the Springfield Chamber of Commerce is the advocate for business in the Springfield area, creating a better quality of life, creating more jobs, working with their members just to improve our economic impact in the area. So the Chamber board would actually hear local issues. For instance, OTC asked them to endorse the OTC issue and then asked them to manage the campaign as well, which our board unanimously voted to endorse and manage. So at that point in time is when the Committee for the Future, which is a PAC connected to the Chamber, is activated to run a campaign. The campaign is Yes for OTC, of what we did for the last 4 months or so. So that's kind of how they're all connected. The PAC is the entity that's actually running everything when it comes to the campaign.
Right, and was the Committee for the Future, the PAC set up by the Chamber of Commerce? What do you guys call it when you talk? Just Chamber? Do you call it COC?
We just call it Chamber.
The Chamber, okay.
Yeah.
So the Committee for the Future, was that designed specifically for Yes for OTC? What does this PAC do?
No, this is an ongoing PAC. So this PAC has existed before for other local issues and will continue to exist. Whenever it's activated, you send something to the Missouri Ethics Commission that says this is what we're going to be working on. So when we decided to do the Yes for OTC, we sent the ballot measures that we'd be working to the NEC, and then that PAC's activated for those. So anytime there's a new proposition or anything on the ballot that they would do, local issues, the committee can be activated.
And the Chamber of Commerce has its hand in a lot of public elections and such, but it's not a public organization. People aren't elected to it.
It's a nonprofit.
It's a nonprofit. Okay, so people aren't elected to it necessarily. We actually have one of our.
It's very confusing. We get these questions a lot. A lot of people have no idea the work that happens kind of behind the scenes in the community between the chamber and the city and the county and OTC and MSU to kind of make the city that you see every day run.
Right, and Kara, if I can just borrow you for a second.
Yeah.
Dusty Childress, what's his position at Lebanon? We have a.
He was the dean.
The dean, okay, so
Yeah.
like the dean of our Lebanon campus
Yeah.
actually serves on the Lebanon Chamber of Commerce. So there's a little bit of mixture, OTC and the chamber. So there aren't rotating members or anything like that. You're not elected necessarily. It's kind of an entity. And I guess you work not just, you're not a satellite, you work intimately with OTC. Like you guys dealt a lot with like Hal Higdon and such with
Right.
OTC, correct?
And we do that with Missouri State as well. We do that with the city. We do that with the county and the school system as well. Just so that at every level, we kind of understand what's going on in the community so we can best help and develop the community and make it grow.
Okay, so let's talk Yes for OTC, okay? So you guys are doing your business at Chamber of Commerce, and eventually, at what point does, hey, there's gonna be an OTC tax campaign cross your desk? When you first hear about it, what's the first thing you do to leap into action?
So there's a lot of thought that goes into this process and if we're actually going to endorse an issue or campaign on it or not. A lot of that comes from our members. So if you come from a small town, you probably have heard of a Chamber of Commerce, and you know the banks are members, and then you have other members throughout the community, small businesses, large businesses. We actually put together a group of those members to decide on if this issue is something, one, we should be endorsing, and two, if we should run the campaign on. So we first probably heard about this in November and started really talking about, is this something we should be involved in? And then by December, like Tyler said, our board had endorsed the issue and had decided that we should run the campaign.
So just to clarify, again, this, you first catch wind of this November of 2017.
As a staff, we probably hear about it, we start planning for it in August.
Really?
But like.
Previous summer, yeah.
Right,
Okay.
but in campaigns now, the cycles just are huge
Yeah.
compared to what they used to be in the past.
Well, this is a big deal, and you and Tyler deserve a ton of credit for the work you did here. This is millions and millions of dollars a year going to OTC, thanks to, in part, if not a large part, of the work you two did. So this is just a huge accomplishment for you two. Okay, so it crosses your desk August, November, you guys kind of leap into action. Go ahead. I interrupted you.
That's basically it. So then
So-
we once we start the campaign, our first kind of step is to start organizing, okay, how much money is this campaign going to take? What do we need resource-wise? Who in the community would be the best fit group to help us gain those resources? And who can we trust to help us, grow and get this off the ground? Then we start thinking about, okay, what groups, what unions are out there, what other organizations, what can they do to help us? And start building those coalitions really early so that we're kind of ready to go when January rolls around.
So we'll get back to Yes for OTC in just a minute. I know you two have been involved with this kind of stuff for a while. Have you guys ever campaigned with a candidate before?
Do you have to go first?
Sure. So I'm also an OTC alum, went to Missouri State and started interning actually for Congressman Long while I was going to Missouri State. And that's kind of where I got my start,
Billy Long.
doing a lot of politics. So
Yep.
worked for him, worked on his campaign. I've worked for several different state representatives. I just moved back from Jefferson City where I worked for a representative there and helped her campaign. I also was a candidate myself at one point in time in the 2016 election cycle. So I've worked on federal, I've worked on the state level as well, statewide, the governor's race, and a lot of local ones.
Where'd you campaign?
Here in Springfield, actually.
For like a local, for a state house seat?
State House, 132nd.
How about that?
Right here, actually.
Yeah.
This is part of it.
So you guys have campaigned as a candidate, but also with candidates before. Tyler, maybe you can kick us off here. How's it different campaigning for a tax as opposed to campaigning for a candidate?
So a tax is just one issue that you're
Right.
dealing with. It's very simple. A lot of what's going to go into it you already know. Whereas a candidate, there's a lot of different things that you can't tell from the beginning. There's a lot of character that you're going to talk about. There's a history, the past, the family. There's so much more that goes into what a candidate actually is compared to a single issue. So it's very different. Messaging is a lot different when it comes to that because you're dealing with multiple issues with a candidate. They have to have a lot of viewpoints, whereas there's one viewpoint usually on an issue.
You know, I wasn't thinking about that really until just listening to you talk. It's, in a way, it's kind of nice to campaign for a tax because you have a ton of control, right?
Absolutely.
You don't have to convince a tax to say this or that. You don't have to wake up in the morning to see your tax say something on camera that you weren't anticipating. It's a tax, right? It's an inanimate object.
Absolutely, and with OTC, this was probably just a home run from the get-go because the community just sees OTC as such a great partner for the Springfield and the surrounding area. It's done so well for itself with the last 20 years and everything they've promised, they've just delivered. The favorability for OTC, if you had that in a candidate, you're gonna win every single time, and we're in the 90 percentile when it comes to favorability of OTCs.
There's polling for favorability for OTC?
Yes.
Yes,
90 percentile?
yes.
Outstanding. How's that compare to other schools locally? You don't have to name any names.
I don't have any poll, we haven't done any other polling.
Right, because you only need to.
Because we only need
Right.
OTC.
Okay, okay, so let's get back to the Yes for OTC. There looked to be several aspects of this campaign. We saw lots of yard signs. Maybe we heard some media broadcasting. I did. I don't know if some of these other folks did necessarily. Can you tell us about the different aspects involved in this campaign?
So any campaign that you run is multifaceted. You have to be able to touch every single voter, whether they watch TV or they just simply read what comes in the mail to them and they don't have access to TV. And we're kind of living in a day and age now where social media is a big part of that too. So we're running every single aspect of that. We're doing yard signs, big signs, billboard, digital signs, and a lot of other pieces like that. I'll actually pass around some of our mailers that went out. The first three are what people would receive in the mail, and you can see how every single time we sent something, they're either targeted to students, people who care about healthcare, or graduates. And then this is actually what our campaign materials look like when we're advocating just at events and things like that. So I'll pass those around. And that's from start to finish. Graphic design, making sure all of your wording is correct. I mean, if your grammar isn't correct on mailer, someone who hates your campaign will post that on the internet. So you really got to be careful with a lot of your materials and really just critically look at everything that you're sending out all the time, as well as keeping track of the 1,000 other things that you're having to do.
Yeah, I mean, one of the biggest things that we did through this campaign as well was grassroots outreach. We probably had over 50 plus speaking events that we sent someone to different kinds of groups like the Kiwanis groups, Rotary clubs, just different clubs throughout the area who are people who are invested in our community already and just needed to hear about the issue. Our young professionals in Springfield came out and they really worked hard to try to get a lot of this passed as well, because this is a huge thing for the Springfield surrounding area to get OTC this and just improve, our quality jobs that we have in the area as well.
So just working down the calendar, you guys catch wind of an OTC tax proposal coming down the pipeline. One of the first things you maybe do is say, let's get some polling on OTC, see how OTC's polling. How does that exactly work, Tyler?
So once you know what you're actually going to be advocating for, you want to send a poll out into the field and figure out, A, kind of where OTC stands within your region or the taxing district for us. And then B, you want to figure out how people are going to be voting on Proposition A and B. And then you break that down from the polling into demographic groups, age, sex, just economic standing, whether they've been to school or not, and you break that all down to figure out who you need to target to try to move the needle for them when it comes to election time.
Folks, anybody remember we had talked about polling in this class? Number one important aspect of polling is what? Starts with an R.
Randomness.
Randomness. How do you ensure randomness when you're polling? How do you poll?
But for us, we actually do that outside of our work. We
Yeah.
hire someone who's a specialist in that field.
Really?
So though we both have a background in polling and have been around it a lot, we hire someone who really, this is what they do every single day.
Really?
Yeah.
So they produce polling, and you just poll, do you like OTC or not, or are there like multiple issues in your poll?
There's a lot of questions. Some of them seem more targeted than others. So you can ask questions about that are more targeted towards, are you in favor of funding for schools, or are you in favor for this or that, to kind of gauge where they're at without actually asking direct
I
questions.
just find this so interesting. So you get results back from the poll, and you're like, here's how we can kind of craft our messaging. Here's areas where we're really strong, apparently with OTC, very, very strong. Here's areas where we're maybe not as strong, so we outplay some areas, downplay others. Does that sound about accurate?
Yeah.
So both taxes passed comfortably. Prop A, continuation of an existing tax. passed 68, almost 70% of the vote. B, which is a new tax, passed more, 58%. What do you attribute to the success of that? Why do you think those things pass so comfortably?
I think the first one is the most obvious one. We saw this in our polling, is that when you're working with such a trusted community asset, like everyone trusts OTC, their grandkids go there, we got that a ton of times. They went there themselves, or they know someone that did, and OTC as an organization has been so trustworthy financially. They're not spending money on frivolous things. They're not going out and buying the newest, thing, a widget. They're focusing on the students, and they're crafting their message and what they're training to those students and the jobs that exist today. And a lot of people in the community have bought that and get it and have that feeling already. So one of, I think, the most important things about OTC is that people already understand the messaging, and when you really look at that community-wide, it came out in the polling, and then it came out in the election. So that's probably one of the easiest elections on that front, because you already have a trusted partner. And there have been a lot of local taxes in a lot of areas around Missouri that haven't been successful because of that same difference.
I'm going to ask you something that is neither of your fields, nonetheless. Listen to Tyler and you chat. The polling suggests OTC polls very, very favorably. So why was turnout so pathetic? We saw it about 9.5% turnout. I know this is not your field necessarily.
It is. That is exactly.
It's exactly your field.
Yeah.
So why did it turn out that way? Because
So-
again, the community really likes OTC. We have a tax saying let's give that thing you like support. Why was turnout so low?
April is always low. For some reason,
April is
April
always
is
low.
always a low turnout. The 9.5% was actually higher than what I projected at one point in
No
time.
kidding.
What we see a lot with local issues is that people, it's not something people turn out to. In Springfield, especially Greene County, there wasn't a lot of things to drive people to the poll. There was no city council seat, so it was literally one issue.
Yeah.
And, a lot of people just, I don't think, maybe they're apathetic that they don't come out. It's troubling to see only 9.5% out, because this will probably impact more people than most other elections that you'll vote in.
Like, there was a study that came out a couple years ago that says OTC impacts the local economy $250 million every year.
$4 for every $1 invested.
Oh, so how about that? What do they call that? They call that
The rate of
return on investment.
So we have to really track on who's going to turn out, like who's actually, so we can know that people like OTC all day long. But if no one shows up to vote and only the no people show up to vote, then we haven't done our jobs. So our job is to make sure that those yes people show up on April 3rd. And that's what a lot of our advertising was focused on, was making sure that people knew the election day, we reminded them to vote over and over and over again.
Speaking of advertising, 100% of the yard signs I saw were yes for OTC. Was there a no campaign?
We, from the very beginning, kept searching and searching for any kind of opposition.
Yeah.
We had on our Facebook page the occasional opposition of single people saying no,
Yeah.
but there was no organized opposition against OTC.
Huh. I listened to a lot of talk radio, and there was some callers and such like that that would be complaining and such about taxes and such, new taxes being introduced. But I didn't ever see an organized campaign against it. I didn't know if you guys had sensed one that I had missed somehow.
No?
So have either of you been a part of a campaign, Tyler, I assume probably the case, that has not been successful? What were the pitfalls of those unsuccessful campaigns, and how are we able to avoid it this time?
I think, and it's not just with what happened with us, but a lot of the campaigns have a poor management structure, or maybe just no management structure, so a lot of decisions that get made aren't necessarily vetted through the correct channels, or there's too many people who are trying to make that one decision. A lot of times you just take for granted your supporters, that they're gonna come out and vote for you, and you don't push as hard maybe to get people out to vote. And then underestimation of your opponent is always a huge, I think, factor in a lot of elections.
Can we talk about your campaign? Would you rather?
I'm as comfortable as I
Okay.
can.
Because if I remember correctly, if you ran in 132, you lost by a hair. Is that accurate?
Correct.
You
So-
lost by like double-digit votes. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I ran in August, my primaries when I lost by 15 votes.
15
So when
votes.
people tell me that votes don't matter,
Yeah.
I have a personal case with that from now on, because votes do matter. 15
Yeah.
votes is literally one block. You can walk one block and get 15 votes. So it was a very tight race throughout the whole time. Neither one of us had name ID coming out, and name ID can be huge in a campaign. It was a very tough district to